Of all 10 commandments carved into stone at Sinai, exactly one comes with a promise attached, not a warning, not a penalty for breaking it. Those exist too elsewhere, and they're severe. A promise. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. Most people learn this commandment as children, which means most people have never actually read it again as adults. It gets filed away early, the one about obeying your parents, sitting still, not talking back, doing as you're told, and then quietly retired once childhood ends, the way you retire a rule that clearly only applied to a stage of life you've already left behind. But the Apostle Paul, writing centuries later to grown men and women in a Greek city, still calls it the first commandment with promise, present tense, still binding, still carrying its condition, addressed to adults who haven't lived under a parent's roof in decades, not to children, to adults. The Hebrew word standing behind honor in that commandment isn't really about behavior at all. Its most basic, literal, physical meaning is heavy. And once you trace what that means verse by verse through the rest of the Hebrew Bible, this stops being a commandment about children being polite. It becomes a commandment about something almost nobody preaches on: what grown adults owe the people who raised them long after those people stop being able to do anything for them in return. Here's why the English word honor quietly undersells what's actually being commanded. In everyday use, honor your parents gets read as a tone of voice instruction. Speak respectfully, don't roll your eyes, remember the birthday, say something nice at Thanksgiving. Vague, sentimental, and easy to feel like you've technically satisfied while doing almost nothing that costs you anything real. The Hebrew word is caved. Its root doesn't mean respect or esteem. It means to be heavy. Kabed shows up across the Hebrew Bible, describing literal physical weight: a heavy hand pressing down, a heavy famine settling over a land, a heavy heart, hardened and unmoving. When the word is applied to a person, give this person kabed, the command isn't to feel a certain way about them, it's to treat them as weighty, substantial, worth the cost of actually bearing. The opposite word makes the point even sharper, because Hebrew builds this commandment as a scale with two named ends, not a spectrum of politeness. Where kabed means heavy, the word kalal means light, and kalal is the exact word Hebrew reaches for when it means contempt, cursing, treating someone as negligible. Exodus 21:17 puts the penalty starkly. He that curseth his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. The word behind curseth there is a form of kalal. Deuteronomy 27:16 says it even more transparently, and the King James translators kept the literal picture intact in their own English. Cursed be he that setteth light by his father or his mother. Setteth light, not is rude to, not disrespects. Setteth light, makes weightless, makes negligible. The entire commandment in its original vocabulary is built on a scale with two positions, heavy and light, not nice and rude. Here's the two-part key the text actually hands you once you know where to look. The first part, kabed, is not asking for a feeling. It's asking you to add real weight, time, money, presence, sustained care, to how you treat your parents, the same way you'd add physical weight to one side of a scale. Sentiment without substance doesn't satisfy it. Warm words on their own weigh almost nothing. The second part is stranger.
And it's the part almost nobody connects on a first reading. The noun form of this exact same root, kabod, is the word the Hebrew Bible uses over and over for God's own glory. Not a separate, grander word borrowed for the occasion, the identical root, carrying the identical idea of weightiness, applied both to how Israel is commanded to regard God's presence and to how children are commanded to regard their parents. Honor and glory are in Hebrew close relatives of the same word.
If the fact that honor your parents and the glory of God share one Hebrew root is new to you, that's exactly the kind of thing this channel exists to dig up. A like helps more people find it. Now, to see exactly how much weight this word is actually asking for and what it looks like when people find a religiously respectable way to avoid paying it, we need to look at where kabed actually shows up in the text.
Exodus 20:12 and its restatement in Deuteronomy 5:16 give the command in its bare form, Kabed, give weight to your father and your mother. Leviticus 19:3 pairs it with a second related word, ye shall fear every man his mother and his father. The Hebrew there is yareh, reverence, the same word used for standing in awe before something genuinely weighty. Two words working the same territory from two directions. Kabed asks for weight given. Yareh asks for weight acknowledged.
Malachi 1 verse 6 shows God applying the exact same word to himself by direct analogy. A son honoreth his father. If then I be a father, where is mine honor? The word is kabed again. God is claiming the identical weighty treatment a son owes a father and pointedly asking where it's gone missing. But the sharpest, most concrete picture of what kabod actually requires and what its absence looks like in practice, stripped of any polite cover, comes centuries later from Jesus himself confronting a loophole that had grown up around this exact commandment. In Mark 7:9-13, and again in Matthew 15:3-6, Jesus accuses the religious teachers of his day of nullifying the commandment to honor father and mother through a legal technicality called korban.
Under this practice, a son could formally declare a portion of his resources korban, dedicated to God, and then claim he was religiously forbidden from using that same money to support his own aging parents, even though the money never actually left his possession or his use. On paper, it looked like piety. In practice, it was kalal, wearing a religious costume. Jesus' response doesn't soften it. Full well ye reject the commandment of God, that ye may keep your own tradition, making the word of God of none effect through your tradition. The weight was never given. It was declared unavailable on a technicality, while the son kept every bit of it for himself.
This is the moment the word study stops being abstract. Whatever kabed requires, it requires something that can be withheld through a clever technicality, which means it was never primarily about tone of voice to begin with. It was about material weight, real time, real resources, actually transferred, not merely gestured at.
Paul makes the same expectation explicit decades after Jesus' confrontation with korban, and this time addressed directly to a church rather than to religious lawyers. Writing to Timothy about how the church should care for widows, he draws a sharp line. If any widow have children or nephews, let them learn first to shew piety at home and to requite their parents. Requite, pay back, return the weight that was once given. And then, more bluntly still, a few verses later, if any provide not for his own, and specially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. Paul isn't describing a nice gesture here. He's describing a minimum floor, one he considers so basic that failing it counts as a denial of faith itself, stated to a congregation of adults about their own aging relatives in the plainest possible terms.
So here's what the text is actually building toward once you put the pieces together. Kabed isn't a posture you adopt. It's a transfer of real weight, attention, money, time, physical presence, from someone who currently has it to someone who now needs it. That's precisely why it can be counterfeited by something like korban. You can perform every outward sign of respect toward your parents, speak to them gently, post warily about them, mark the occasions, and still be kalal, treating them as light, in the one place the commandment actually cares about, which is what you're willing to spend on them when it costs you something.
And this reframes who the commandment was actually aimed at all along. A small child has almost no material weight to give, no income, no property, no independent means of support, nothing on the scale beyond obedience itself. The commandment was never mainly written for children in that condition. It was written for adults, people who, by the time they're grown, have accumulated exactly the kind of weight that can now either be given to aging parents or quietly, respectably withheld from them. Korban doesn't need a religious label to work in the 21st century. It just needs a modern-sounding justification. I'm too busy right now. They made their own choices.
That's not really my responsibility anymore. Jesus' rebuke in Mark 7 was never aimed at children. It was aimed at grown men with real resources, finding a principled-sounding reason not to spend them on the parents who no longer had any leverage left to demand it. Paul's instruction to Timothy names the same audience just as plainly, not sons and daughters still living at home, but adult believers with households and income of their own, told that requiting their own parents is a floor beneath which faith itself is called into question. This is worth sitting with for a moment before moving on, because it inverts something most people assume without ever examining it.
The common instinct is to treat honor your parents as a commandment with an expiration date, binding while you're small and dependent, optional once you're grown and independent, maybe worth a phone call now and then out of nostalgia. The text runs the opposite direction entirely. The weight the commandment asks for only becomes possible to give once you're grown enough to have any weight of your own to give in the first place. Childhood obedience was never the main event. It was the training ground for a much larger, much costlier obligation that only starts once you leave it.
Trace kabod's noun form, kabod, and the same logic of weight runs in the opposite direction too, not from child to parent, but from God toward his people, and it uses the identical vocabulary. Exodus 40:34 describes the glory, kabod, of the Lord filling the tabernacle so completely, so physically, that Moses himself couldn't enter it. This isn't a metaphor for a warm feeling. It's a claim about something real, substantial, and immovable, occupying actual space. Centuries later, Isaiah hears the seraphim declare that the whole earth is full of his glory. Kabod, again, the same weighty, tangible presence, extended now over the entire earth rather than a single tent.
Put the two directions side by side, and the pattern becomes impossible to miss. Downward, from God, kabod describes an actual weight of presence that cannot be argued away or wished away. Upward, from a child toward a parent, kabed commands the same category of substance, not a compliment paid in passing, but something that occupies real space in a life. Time carved out deliberately out of a full schedule, money spent rather than merely offered in principle, presence given specifically when it would have been easier and cheaper to withhold it. The text reaches for one root to describe both directions because in its own vocabulary it's naming one category of action, not two separate ones. Treating a parent as weightless and treating God as weightless are here disturbingly close to the same failure.
Proverbs makes the material dimension explicit even when the word kabed itself isn't on the page. Honor the Lord with thy substance and with the first fruits of all thine increase. Honor measured in actual harvest, actual property, actual wealth handed over, not in a feeling of gratitude kept privately. The pattern holds together end to end. Whether the object of the weight is God or a parent, the text keeps reaching for the same underlying claim. Real honor shows up as something you can point to, not just something you can say.
Here's what this means concretely for anyone whose parents are still living. It's not primarily about the tone you take on a phone call, though tone still matters. It's about whether they occupy real weight in how you actually spend your finite time and finite resources, whether you make room for them inside a calendar that's already full, whether aging or struggling parents receive real material support rather than well-worded concern, whether there's currently a korban-shaped excuse quietly doing the job of making your unavailability sound principled instead of simply convenient.
This is uncomfortable because it can't be faked with better manners. You can be unfailingly polite to a parent on every visit and still be treating them as kalal, light, negligible, easy to set aside in every place that would actually cost you something to change. And the reverse also holds. A genuinely difficult, tense, complicated relationship can still satisfy kabed if the weight is honestly there, the calls actually made, the bills actually covered, the time actually given, even in seasons when the warmth isn't.
Step back and look at the whole shape of it. One Hebrew root, kabed, meaning heavy, standing behind a commandment most people learned as children and quietly never revisited as adults. Its named opposite, kalal, meaning light, reserved for cursing and contempt, turning the commandment into a scale with exactly two positions, not a wide, forgiving spectrum of politeness. Its noun form, kabod, doing double duty as the very word for God's own glory, linking how a child regards a parent to how all of Israel was commanded to regard a presence that filled the tabernacle and left no room to enter. And its most concrete test case, korban, showing precisely what it looks like to preserve every outward form of honor while structurally withholding the actual weight. Resources declared unavailable on a technicality while they stay entirely in your own hands.
Picture a scale, the kind with two hanging pans. Words, tone, a birthday card, a brief obligatory visit. Pile all of it onto one side, and it can still weigh almost nothing. What kabod asks for is whatever actually moves the needle. The resources you were free to keep, the time you were free to spend elsewhere, the presence you were under no enforceable obligation to give, handed over anyway, deliberately, because that is what the word has always meant. If your relationship with a parent is easy right now, this is straightforward. Give the weight, generously, while you still have the chance, and they're still here to receive it. If it isn't easy, if there's real history, real distance, real hurt running in either direction, kabed doesn't require you to manufacture warmth you don't actually feel. It asks something narrower, and in some ways more achievable. Don't let a genuinely justified grievance quietly calcify into a korban. A principled-sounding reason why the weight simply never gets transferred. It's possible to hold a complicated relationship and a full scale at the same time.
And if both your parents are already gone, this word still has something to say to you, not as an assignment left undone, but as a lens for how you'll weigh the next relationship that asks something costly of you. A spouse, a child of your own, someone in your care who has run out of leverage to demand anything from you at all. Kabed was never only about parents. It's the text's whole definition of what it looks like to give someone real weight instead of light words.
If this changed how you read the fifth commandment, tell us in the comments. And if you've ever caught yourself or someone else reaching for a reasonable-sounding excuse instead of something a parent actually needed, that's exactly the pattern this word was written to name 3,000 years before anyone called it korban. Subscribe. This channel exists for exactly this kind of word. The one sitting inside a commandment you memorized before you were old enough to understand what it was actually asking of you.